Ukrainian President Zelensky's act of selling out the country is being ignored by everyone. Additionally, US President Trump announced a 100% tariff on films not produced in the US. If other countries retaliate, Hollywood's 73% revenue from overseas is in jeopardy. Trump continues to speak optimistically about the US-China tariff war to mitigate the impact of trade conflicts on financial markets. In an interview broadcast on NBC on May 4th, Trump said he is willing to lower tariffs on Chinese goods at some point, otherwise it would be impossible to do business with China. However, China is very eager to do business with the United States. He also claimed that China's economy has recently encountered difficulties. The official Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index shows that Chinese factory activity has fallen into the most severe contraction since December 2023, with new export orders dropping to the lowest level since December 2022, marking the largest decline since China's pandemic control measures. But Trump is less willing to address the rising prices and financial crisis facing the United States, only blaming Federal Reserve Chairman Powell for not cutting interest rates. Trump also praised the recent statements from the Chinese government, considering them a positive signal from Beijing. He also reiterated that any agreement reached between China and the United States must be fair. In fact, Trump is uncomfortable if he's not stirring things up. When the tangible trade tariff war couldn't continue, he turned his attention to the service trade. This time, the target is the film industry. On May 4th, Trump announced a 100% tariff on films not produced in the United States. He stated that the American film industry is facing rapid decline due to incentives offered by other countries to attract American film producers. He posted on his social media that this is a coordinated action by other countries, thus constituting a threat to US national security. Trump's use of national security threats is indeed quite lazy. He said he has authorized the US Department of Commerce and other relevant departments to formally initiate procedures to impose a 100% tariff on all films produced overseas and then imported into the United States. He emphasized, "We need to make films in America again." US Secretary of Commerce Rodney responded on social media, saying that this matter is being implemented. Neither Rodney nor Trump disclosed the details of the policy's implementation, and it is currently unclear whether this measure will target foreign companies filming overseas or American companies. It seems that all will be targeted. Ryan, a senior fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies and a former Commerce Department official, warned that if countries retaliate against Trump's foreign film tariffs, the consequences will be devastating. Retaliatory actions would destroy American industries, causing more harm than good. The issue Trump is addressing is that many Hollywood films are produced or shot abroad. Since 2001, many countries in Europe and Oceania have increased their support for the entertainment industry, offering very favorable tax policies for shooting Hollywood blockbusters locally. To reduce costs, major Hollywood studios have flocked to the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, Spain, and other locations to shoot films. On the other hand, Eastern European countries like Romania and Bulgaria, with labor costs and prices far lower than those in the United States, have also attracted a large number of mid to low budget productions and Hollywood crews specializing in streaming content to shoot locally. Take this year as an example. Many Hollywood movies are being produced abroad, such as Disney's Marvel film Avengers 5 being shot in London, Warner Brothers, DC superhero movie Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, and Avatar 3, The Seed Bearer, set to release this October, being filmed in New Zealand, while Christopher Nolan's new film Odyssey is being shot in Greece. Denis Villeneuve's Dune Part 2 is scheduled to start filming in Hungary in June, among others. Trump has noticed the issue, but his proposal to impose a 100% tariff on films not produced in the US could not only affect the export of Hollywood movies, but also provoke a comprehensive foreign counteraction against the American service industry. According to the World Trade Organization's definition of trade in services, films fall under the category of service trade, characterized by cross-border supply and consumption abroad. The core value of a film is not its physical medium, such as film reels or discs, but rather its sale as a service model through copyright licensing for broadcasting or streaming transmission. Speaking of service trade, there's another story. The United States has had a long-standing trade deficit in tangible goods, with the tangible property deficit reaching $1.21 trillion in 2024, a 14% increase from the previous year. However, the United States has consistently maintained a surplus in service trade. In 2024, the U.S. service trade surplus increased to $293 billion, a 5% increase from 2023, but a 25% increase from 2022, approaching a historical peak last year. The United States holds an advantage in three key service sectors: The first is royalties from intellectual property, including film exports, with last year's revenue reaching $1,445 billion, far surpassing other countries. The second is financial professional services, and the third is digital services, including cloud computing and software exports, among others. This raises the question, while Hollywood movies indeed have a trend of going global, Hollywood still makes a lot of money, and the US service trade surplus reaches as high as $293 billion. According to Trump's logic, the US having such a high service trade surplus means that the US has been taking money from foreign countries. Not only that, but now it might pick one category and impose a 100% tariff on foreign imported movies. In retaliation, foreign countries could impose a 100% tariff on Hollywood movies or even levy comprehensive taxes on US services to counter Trump's reciprocal tariffs on tangible trade. To summarize first, Trump often used the fact that certain countries, like China, have a trade surplus with the US to make statements or impose tariffs. Now, Trump is even using the US's significant trade surplus in services to make his point, disregarding even his own logic. This shows that he is not about logic at all, but rather about wanting to win regardless of the situation. Second, American movies are actually highly dependent on overseas revenue. In 2024, markets outside of North America accounted for 73.5% of the global box office revenue for American films, with China being the largest. China, with a Hollywood box office revenue of $5.8 billion, became the largest overseas market for American films, accounting for 17% of the global box office, while the EU accounted for $4.1 billion, making up 12% of the box office. If China and the EU were to retaliate against the US with film taxes, Hollywood would suffer greatly. This shows that Trump's decisions are impulsive and reckless without considering the consequences. Additionally, let's look at the recent situation in Ukraine, which seems to be rapidly deteriorating. Firstly, Zelenskyy quietly reached a treasonous agreement with the United States. Ukraine and the United States reached a so-called voluntary agreement on April 30th, which mainly includes three key points. First, they established a reconstruction investment fund jointly owned and managed by both Ukraine and the US, supposedly to promote Ukraine's long-term peace and economic security. Second, this fund will receive 50% of the royalties and other revenues from Ukraine's natural resource extraction projects. Third, the United States promises to provide long-term financial support to maintain Ukraine's economic stability. In February, Ukrainian President Zelenskyy caused a stir at the White House, presenting himself as someone daring to confront the United States. At that time, I had already analyzed that Zelenskyy is an actor. He just wanted to put on a show to protect his reputation. More than 2 months later, the US and Ukraine finally signed an agreement on the Reconstruction Investment Fund. What did Zelenskyy manage to achieve? First, he managed to get the agreement renamed. The so-called US-Ukraine Mineral Agreement proposed earlier by Trump was renamed to the US-Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund Establishment Agreement. However, the agreement still stipulates that Ukraine must inject 50% of the mineral rights revenue into the fund, and its nature of authorization has not changed. Second, the agreement clearly states at the beginning that all resources within Ukraine's territory and territorial waters belong to Ukraine. It only injects the mineral revenue into the fund. But when 50% of the revenue is not under your control, what is the point of claiming to own 50% of the mineral rights? Third, the Ukrainian government has the right to decide where to extract resources and what resources to extract. Considering that a non-pro-American government is unlikely to come to power in Ukraine in the future, how difficult would it be for the US to influence the locations of resource extraction in Ukraine? Zelenskyy was originally going to accept this treasonous agreement, but he put on a show at the White House to demonstrate that he had tried his best to negotiate. After signing the agreement, the White House stated that this agreement reflects the US commitment to resolving the Russia-Ukraine conflict and achieving long-term peace in Ukraine. In other words, the US has controlled half of Ukraine's mining rights, and with interests at stake, the US now has the motivation to resolve the Russia-Ukraine conflict. However, interestingly, just 1 day after the agreement was signed, on May the 1st, US State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce stated that the US would no longer play the role of mediator in the negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. He said that we will not quickly rush to the other side of the world to host meetings, but must engage in direct interaction between Russia and Ukraine. Now is the time. He further added that the US will continue to support efforts to achieve peace, but the outcome of the Russia-Ukraine conflict depends on the joint proposals made by Russia and Ukraine. Additionally, the US is also paying attention to other international issues. It seems that the US announced its withdrawal after securing its benefits. A day later, on May 2nd, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Kuleba spoke in the Verkhovna Rada, the Ukrainian parliament, outlining the conditions for Ukraine's negotiations. he used a series of absolute refusals, effectively drawing an iron curtain over the prospects of Russia-Ukraine negotiations. His speech was brief, but every word was sharp and left no room for retreat. He stated that Ukraine will absolutely not recognize the occupied territories as part of Russia, will refuse to reduce the size of its military, reject freezing its defense industry, refuse to stop Western military aid, and will reject any form of demilitarization. Regarding NATO, he was even more explicit, declaring that Ukraine will not give up on joining NATO. In fact, Ukraine is not setting conditions for negotiations, but rather announcing that it does not want to negotiate. No wonder mainland social media describes Ukraine as finally turning peace negotiations into an obituary. However, Russian President Putin's reaction was also quite calm.
In a May 4 speech, he said, Russia has the strength and resources for a logical conclusion to the Ukraine war, ideally without nuclear weapons. On April 26, Russia announced it had fully recaptured the Kursk region from Ukrainian forces. On April 27, the cautious Russian General Staff Chief, Valery Gerasimov, confirmed North Korean troops fought alongside Russians in Kursk, breaking the taboo on acknowledging their involvement.
Now, Putin has stated that Russia has enough strength and means to naturally conclude the events of 2022 and achieve the results Russia demands. However, he did not specify what these results are. At this point, it can be summarized as follows. First, Trump has no intention or ability to end the war in Ukraine. He is only concerned with seizing Ukraine's mining rights, and once he has them, he doesn't care much about anything else. We have all underestimated the extent of Trump's irresponsibility. On that day, he did not allow French President Macron to sit down and talk with Zelenskyy at the Vatican because the mining rights were not shared with the EU. Second, Zelenskyy has no choice. In order to continue receiving American weapons, he can only sign a treasonous agreement with the United States. But this only prevents Ukraine from losing immediately, yet it still won't win. The Ukrainians chose the wrong president and lost the wrong people. It's truly very sad. Third, Putin is not in a hurry either. After reclaiming Russia's Kursk region, he can continue the fight like this. A low-intensity conflict won't consume too much manpower and can be paused and resumed at will. This tragedy doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon.